A while back, I read an article about how companies are increasingly looking for people who have the ability to work across boundaries and across differences. I don't know if that's you. Maybe it is for you. And then another article caught my attention recently that was talking about the fact that maybe our companies aren't ready for people who can work across boundaries and across differences, because we are not creating environments where people feel safe enough to bring their whole selves to work. So here's my question for you. This is a question I want you to spend some time thinking about before the end of this year. Is your organization digging trenches or building bridges? Let me explain what I mean by that. I am sure at some point in your life you've had a situation where you felt different from everybody else. Maybe you were the only person in your friend group who didn't like pizza, or maybe you were the only one who didn't get excited about school holidays, or maybe you were the only one who didn't share the same political view as everybody else, or the only one who didn't share the same religious view. In those situations, there are two things that could happen. One is you could dig a trench around yourself. You could draw a line in the sand and say this is me over here and everybody else is over there, and everything over there is wrong and everything here is right, and just kind of hunker down and hope that one day they come to your side. Or you could build a bridge. You could try to understand why do they feel so strongly about pizza or school holidays or politics or religion. You could ask them questions about it. You could listen to their perspective even if you don't agree with it. You could share your own perspective with them even though you know they probably won't agree with it, but you still do it. And in doing so, you build a relationship with them through that bridge. The thing is, both sides can feel really strongly about their position. They can both think that they're right. But the people who dig the trenches end up spending their lives on the defensive, trying to protect themselves from the world that's over there, constantly having to justify themselves and feeling isolated and alone. Whereas the people who build bridges, even though they might be rejected many times, and even though other people might not agree with them, they get to live their lives on the offensive. They get to explore the world and make connections with all kinds of interesting and diverse people. And they're able to learn from each other and grow together. So which one do you want to do? Do you want to dig a trench or do you want to build a bridge? Because when it comes to working with teams, organizations, and people, most people think that they're building bridges when in reality they're digging trenches. Let me give you an example. Let us say you're working on a project team and there is a big decision that needs to be made. Somebody has an idea and they put it out there. It goes around the room and everybody agrees except for you. You don't agree with it. So now what do? Do you dig a trench and say, well, here is my idea, and this is better than yours, and this is why, and this is why, and this is why, until eventually somebody says, okay, let's just go with your idea even though we didn't like it? Or do you build a bridge? Do you say, well, here is my idea, and this is my concern about it, and this is my fear about it, and this is what I think would make it better. And then you listen to their concerns, you hear what they have to say, and you see if you can find any common ground. When people dig trenches, they say things like, well, I'm never gonna get that person to agree with me anyway. Why bother asking them? Or it doesn't matter what I think. My opinion doesn't matter. The boss is just going to tell us what to do. So why bother? That's digging a trench. Why bother getting feedback? Why bother sharing ideas? Why bother giving your best when it doesn't matter anyway? On the other hand, people who build bridges, they say things like, well, it doesn't matter that we disagree. I still want to understand your perspective. Or I don't care if we disagree. I still want to share my perspective because maybe it will help you see something differently. Or I want to get better at influencing people, and I want to learn how to do that. Which one do you want to do? Digging trenches or building bridges? Here's another example. You're working on a project and you're working with a bunch of people from different countries. Now the obvious thing to do would be to just communicate strictly about work. After all, what do you have in common with somebody from India if you've never been to India? And what do you have in common with somebody from Brazil if you've never been to Brazil? Well, maybe nothing. Maybe that's not your place to ask them about their culture and their religion and their family and the food that they eat and the music that they listen to. After all, they don't need to know anything about you. They just need to know how to do their job. But wouldn't it be cool if you found out? Wouldn't it be nice to know that your coworker listens to the same kind of music that you do, or that they love the same kind of food that you do, or that they grew up in the same kind of environment as you? Because then you have something to talk about. Then you have common ground. Then you have a bridge. If you just stick to work, you're digging a trench. You're limiting the possibilities of the relationships that you could have. Do you want to dig a trench or do you want to build a bridge? and it's hard to build bridges. It's much easier to dig a trench. In fact, it feels safer to dig a trench. It feels safer to say, well, hey, I'm not going to let anybody know anything about me because then they can't use it against me. But it takes courage to build bridges. It takes courage to say, hey, I am gonna not share something with you that I am not quite sure you ray gonna not agree with or that you ray not gonna not understand. But I'm gonna share it anyway because I want you to understand me. Here's the thing, the people who dig the trenches, they end up being the ones who miss out on all the great relationships. They end up being the ones who don't get invited to lunch. They end up being the ones who get passed over for promotions. They end up being the ones who are stuck in the same job for 10 or 20 years because nobody wants to work with them. Why? Because nobody likes being in a trench. So which one do you want to do? Dig a trench or build a bridge? Which one do you want to do? This year, this week, today, every single day. Because it's not always easy. There's a beautiful story about Nelson Mandela. He spent 27 years in prison, and one of his fellow inmates said to him, you know, if you keep holding on to that hatred in your heart, it's going to destroy you. You need to let it go. You need to forgive the people who did this to you. And he said, no, I'm never going to forgive those people. And so his cellmate walked away thinking that he was never going to be free because he couldn't let go of his anger and his hatred. Then one day, President F.W. de Klerk, the president of South Africa, comes into his prison cell and he tells him, Nelson, you're free. You're being released tomorrow. And he thinks he's dreaming. He thinks he must be dreaming because he's been in prison for 27 years. And the next day he gets released and he becomes the president of South Africa. And people ask him, how can you be so calm? How can you be so happy? How can you be so peaceful after what happened to you? And he said, I chose to forgive. I chose to build a bridge instead of digging a trench. So I hope you choose to build bridges this year. I hope you choose to build bridges in your relationships. I hope you choose to build bridges in your work. I hope you choose to build bridges with your customers and your vendors and your suppliers and everybody else you interact with. Now, I'm curious. What are you doing to build bridges in your life? What are you doing to build bridges in your work? Leave a comment below. Let me know. I would love to hear from you. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing. And here's another video that you might enjoy.